Hello, everyone, and welcome to this global webinar, which is taking place in collaboration with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the SCBD. My name is Tim Hodges, and I'm very pleased to be here to moderate today's webinar, which, through a series of interventions from some very special guest speakers, will take stock of DSI, digital sequence information, in the policymaking context in the CBD, including the MLM and the Cali Fund, and of course in other relevant fora. In a nutshell, we're going to do the following. We're going to remind ourselves of what has been agreed to at the multilateral level, examine where we're at on DSI policy. So in other words, what's the current state of play? And finally, we're going to spend a bit of time thinking and discussing the outlook for DSI policy over the course of this year, as we aim for COP17 later in the year. But before we get to substance, in earnest, let's begin with some official remarks. It's my pleasure to first give the floor to my good friend, Tauko Shikongo, from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, who is our partner, as I mentioned, in this event. Tauko, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Tim, and good day, colleagues, distinguished participants, partners, and friends. It is indeed a pleasure to join you today and to offer these opening remarks on behalf of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocols at this global webinar on digital sequenced information. Over the past several years, from Cancun to Egypt to Montreal, Kunming, from the decisions taken at COP15 here in Montreal, and most recently in Cali, we have traveled a remarkable collective journey. What began with widely differing views has gradually evolved into a shared recognition of the importance of ensuring fair and equitable sharing from the use of DSI on genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. This shared understanding is now anchored in Goal C and Target 13 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Today, Decision 15.9 has been operationalized through Decision 16.2, and the Multilateral Mechanism on DSI, and the use of DSI, including the Cali Fund, is now established. The steering committee has met twice. The Ad-Hoc Technical Expert Group convened just a week ago, and work is advancing on the full suite of studies and analytical work requested by parties during COP16. And this is on accessibility and accountability tools, new data models, potential contribution rates, standards for entity identification, and including the methodology for the review of the mechanism and its funds. All of these efforts are designed to strengthen our collective understanding and to ensure that implementation of the mechanism is effective, efficient, equitable, and future-proofed. We've also developed guides for stakeholders, especially the private sector, that are in place as to what is expected from them, as has been agreed by COP16. The account has been opened, a first payment has been done, and the interim secretariat is now fully operational. This webinar of today offers an important opportunity to pause and collectively take stock where we are, where we started, where we stand today, and what lies ahead policy-wise as we move towards COP17 in Yerevan later this year. Allow me to express at this point deep appreciation to all contributors and partners who have supported this work to date. We extend our sincere thanks to the Government of Norway and the European Commission for enabling this informal DSI process, and to all colleagues working tirelessly across institutions, including the Secretariat staff, who continue to advance the mandates given by parties under Decision 16.2. Real progress will require a sustained whole of government and whole of society effort. Parties, industry, academia, indigenous peoples and local communities, and all other stakeholders working together to support full implementation of the Economy Montreal Global Partnership Framework and its 4 goals and 23 targets, particularly Goal C and Target 13. Thank you all for your commitment and for joining today's important dialogue, and we look forward to fruitful, insightful, and constructive outcomes and deliberations. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Toko, for your warm words of welcome, and I think is a very useful overview of some details that we're going to explore very shortly with a good number of colleagues, including some very close colleagues of yours and ours. You mentioned supporters, and it's now my pleasure to, in fact, invite another good friend and someone who's been closely involved in DSI and supporting both formal and informal work over the course of the last several years that you've noted, Toko. And it's Ms. Ida Helmark from NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. And we've asked her to say a few words on behalf of Norway, of course, and as a co-sponsor of a number of forthcoming events and discussions, which will be sponsored by Norway together with the European Commission and others in terms of advancing understanding on DSI and making progress. Ida, please, it's my pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for being here today. It seems like quite a long ago that many of us met in Cali, where the decision 16/2 on digital sequence information was adopted and the Cali Fund was established. And then very shortly thereafter, the operationalization of the Cali Fund in Rome a year ago now in February 2025. So I think it's about time to take stock of the process since then and to look at what remains to effectively implement the decision 16/2. Tim was mentioning that Norway is contributing here. So it's to complement the formal process. Norway is a co-sponsor together with the European Commission of the informal DSI process. And it was quite clear from the last intersessional period that the informal process contributed to the agreement of decision 16/2. And the informal process is not replacing the formal process, but the whole idea is to exchange views on what is needed to support the implementation of the decision. And doing this in an informal, friendly, and safe setting can foster mutual trust. And the trust is really needed to test ideas and find some common ground. And a successful implementation of 16/2 builds on us all being very constructive, bold, and well-informed. And I hope that this seminar and also the following, both formal and informal work, will contribute to that. So with that, please, Tim, take us through the current state of play.
Thank you very much, Ida. Personally, for your leadership and that of Norway in bringing us forward as a collective. Bold, you said, constructive, and well-informed. Well, we can't assure everything in one webinar, but we certainly can ensure that we'll be better informed as a result of this webinar. You mentioned the formal and informal, and a word occurred to me as you were speaking. I think that's quite appropriate in this context, these parallel supportive processes that are going on. I would say the term that comes to mind is symbiotic. I think it's absolutely a symbiotic relationship and one that's mutually dependent and leads to bigger and better things. So again, thank you very much for your remarks, Ida. So let's get into it. We've asked Pierre Duplessis for some opening remarks and thoughts in terms of, you mentioned Cali, from Cali to Yerevan to Armenia later this year. So Pierre, well, first of all, welcome. I think get your camera on. I think everyone knows you, actually, after all these years of your efforts to help move things ahead and make things happen. I know you're speaking on your own behalf at this point, but you, of course, have massive experience from wearing a range of hats in and around ABS and DSI for many years. So today, from your perspective, maybe you could say a few words about where things are at since Cali and what's ahead on the road to COP17. Like a long journey, I'm sure we'll be hearing about potholes and pit stops, and I think safe places as well. Pierre, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you, Tim, and hello everyone. Yes, can I have the next slide, please? The the organizers did indeed ask me to speak about the road from Cali to Yerevan, but I've never been very good at following orders, and so I decided it would actually be more helpful for everyone if I start at Cancun and if I look forward to what will come at COP18 after Yerevan. And take a little detour via Geneva, because in my mind, in Geneva, we came to an understanding that enabled us to make real progress, but which we will have to revisit quite soon. And so basically, those of you who have been in this process for a long time will remember that there was quite a kerfuffling going on in Cancun in 2016, where we then agreed in the CBD to discuss the implications of digital sequence information as a placeholder term for all of the objectives of the CBD. And then we followed up on that later, and those discussions also were taken up in other places, or had already been taken up in other places. For example, probably the first official mention of it was within the international treaty, and it had also been discussed at the WHO before the CBD decision. But as the UN body that introduced access and benefit sharing into the international legal framework, this was an important milestone. 2 years later in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP14, we agreed that we will do further work on benefit sharing from the use of DSI, because we all agreed how important it was for conservation and sustainable use, and that we would do that discussion on benefit sharing within the context of developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And we also agreed there that it's very important to build further capacity in a number of countries to access, use, generate, and analyze DSI. And I mention these because, to my mind, we haven't really followed up on the agreements that we had early on. We have not really followed up very much on the capacity development initiatives, and we have not agreements, and we have not followed up very much on the importance of DSI for conservation and sustainable use. We seem to be a little bit stuck on the benefit sharing side of it. Anyway, be that as it may, at COP15 in Montreal, after the delay caused by COVID, we decided to establish, as part of the global biodiversity framework, a multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing from the use of DSI. And we agreed on the importance of capacity development once more, and didn't do anything about it. Then at COP16 in Cali, we agreed on further processes to operationalize the multilateral mechanism and establish the Cali Fund for benefit sharing. And now going ahead to COP17 in Yerevan, the COP will consider the outputs from the processes that were agreed on in Cali. And you will hear about those in much more detail soon. I'd just like to point out that we also decided at COP15 that the effectiveness of the multilateral mechanism, including inter alia, the criteria laid out in paragraphs 9 and 10 of the present decision, will be reviewed. Next slide, please. And here's that paragraph 9 and 10 from CBD decision 15/9, what I like to refer to as the Geneva Principles, because these were actually agreed in Geneva by the working group on the GBF, and formed a sort of a bedrock of understanding of principles that has been carried forward and as I say, will be brought up again if we don't bear them in mind at the latest at COP18. And I think it's worth a while to just quickly remind ourselves what we agreed that the solution for fair and equitable benefit sharing on DSI should do. It should be efficient, feasible, practical. It should generate more benefits, including both monetary and non-monetary, than costs. It should be effective. It should provide certainty and legal clarity for providers and users of digital sequence information on genetic resources. It should not hinder research and innovation. It should be consistent with open access to data, and it should not be incompatible with international legal obligations. It should be mutually supportive of other access and benefit sharing instruments, and it should take into account the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, including with respect to the traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources that they hold. And then paragraph 10 recognizes that the monetary and non-monetary benefits arising from the use of digital sequence information should in particular be used to support conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity and inter alia benefit IP&LCs. Now, next slide, please. On the way forward, I think it's important to reflect on the extent to which we have kept those Geneva Agreement, the principles in mind, and to what extent we are on course to address them and to address them effectively. And I want to remind everyone that for this system to work, those principles must all be addressed, right? I mean, we all have our favorites, right? If you are from research, or you are from business, or you are from a developing country, or you are from an IP&LC, you will probably have your favorites and in those 9+1 principles. But for the whole exercise to achieve its goal, all of those principles need to be addressed in an equitable and fair way. And in doing that now, going forward, we face a number of, let's call them challenges. One of them is the current situation of geopolitical instability. And one of the effects of that is that people are now starting to wonder whether what has so far been guaranteed open access to data will still persist in the future. We have seen examples of that access being denied on political ground, and therefore the reliability of that open access system is now no longer as sure as it once might have seemed. There's also been an exponential growth in data from the DSI in particular, of course, but also much more generally, much more data, to the extent that I hear people talking about data being the new oil. And when I hear that, I'm reminded of genetic resources being the new green gold, and I take it with a pinch of salt. But we have seen an enormous explosion in the amount of data that's available. At the same time, we've seen in parallel an exponential growth in the capacity of artificial intelligence to use that data and to do creative things with that data that would have seemed completely unimaginable 10 years ago even. And that capacity is growing by leaps and bounds. The implications of that, of course, is that what once seemed quite valuable sequence data might in fact no longer be so, because AI will simply find other ways of solving problems that before you could only have solved by a reference to a particular genomic sequence. I think it's also important to flag that that there seems to be persistent attempts from various quarters to impose a bilateral ABS approach on DSI. And to my mind, this is futile, not only because of the implications of the growth of AI, but also because of the implications of trying to enforce a bilateral approach in a world where that geopolitically is no longer a priority for those with the capacity to enforce it. I think another issue we should flag is that users of DSI are still reluctant to contribute to the Cali Fund, and are not focused on the urgency of the biodiversity crisis. Of course, they have their reasons, and you will hear some of those as well in this webinar. but it is an issue that undermines trust and fuels these attempts to impose bilateral approaches. And on the requirement that the CBD solution should be compatible with approaches to DSI and other international bodies, it seems to me that we are actually on different tracks in those other bodies. And that some of them, at least, would not be compatible with the approach embodied in the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund and 16/2 more generally. Also, how it doesn't help that at least in some of those bodies, there's been a distinct lack of progress on the issue of DSI. And then finally, a general question, which I don't think anyone has an answer for right now, but which we should certainly think about, is that if the multilateral mechanism, as stated in Decision 15/9, is part of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which has, an overall goal date of 2050, but has a use by date of 2030, does this mean that everything that has been agreed so far and that will be done up to COP17 and COP18, will that be up for renegotiation post 2030? And if it is, then we better think about how what we do now can be made an enduring and valuable foundation for the way after 2030. I hope that stimulates some thinking. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Pierre. As always, very helpful and also very stimulating, and also extremely constructive to remind us all of what we've actually agreed to and where there has been some mutual understanding and a strong, I think, quite a strong foundation built. And of course, I'm referring to what you refer to as the Geneva Principles. They're with us, and I think they're lasting, and I think they actually represent a very strong set of foundation stones. So thank you very much, Pierre. It's now my genuine pleasure of introducing some very good friends, colleagues, and collaborators from the Secretariat of the CBD. We have two, in addition to Telco, with us today, so we're very fortunate to have three of the Secretariat's finest here today. And I'd like to now introduce Charlotte Germain-Aubray and Kirsty Bryant. Welcome, and I think make sure your cameras are on, and microphones, of course. Charlotte, I think you're going to start off, and you'll be followed by Kirsty, and you're going to walk us through the formal process on DSI under the CBD, obviously, and letting folks know what's been happening on DSI. And there certainly is very much happening on DSI. It's actually quite impressive in my view. But before I give you the floor, Charlotte, I wanted to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A button, which is, if you don't know where it is by now, you clearly need help. It's down at the bottom of your screen if you're watching. And then you can use that button to pose some questions to Charlotte and Kirsty as it relates to what they have to say, which of course principally importantly on process and timing. And they in turn will be able to respond to you live today, and if they're unable to, which I can't imagine, there will be more details forthcoming. Ultimately, they'll be dealt with. So I do encourage everyone to use the Q&A button. So enough from me. Charlotte, please, you have the floor, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here, especially to be introduced like this, some of the Secretary's finest. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's our pleasure for me and my colleague Kirsty to introduce the official roadmap, like what we're doing with DSI, what we have and what we're doing and what you can expect. Next slide, please. So I don't really need to linger on the fact that at COP16, a decision was taken, the multilateral mechanism was operationalized, the global fund is now called the Cali Fund. I think this is all very familiar to you. I'll just focus on a few points very quick. And just as a refresher, so all users of DSI should share benefits that arise from its use. That's a very strong statement in the decision. It also talks about the scope of DSI. So what are we talking about? So we're talking about DSI that is made publicly available in compliance with national legislations, where there is some that is not subject to mutually agreed terms, as those mutually agreed terms do include DSI and its sharing modalities, and also which is not provided for under other international instruments, which I believe we're going to hear from a bit later, unless this instrument actually chooses the Cali Fund as its mechanism for monetary benefit sharing. Next slide, please. So here we can see who should pay and how much, basically. So we have a list of 5 sectors, industry sectors that are quite broad, and all are users of DSI. And also, we're only looking at the largest companies in those sectors. So you have 3 thresholds for assets, sales, and profits. And companies have to exceed 2 out of those 3 thresholds as average over the last 3 years for the expectation of their contribution to sort of kick in a little bit, if you want. The amount of contribution is set at 1% of profit or 0.1% of revenue. That's an indicative rate, and that's either or. There's also in the decision clearly stated who is not expected to contribute, which are entities active in the sectors, the 5 sectors you can see here, but do not directly or indirectly use DSI. Also, entities operating public databases, public research, and academic institutions are also not expected to contribute. However, it clearly says that additional contributions are encouraged. So it's not because you're a bit smaller or you're in the public sector, etc. You want to contribute, you are welcome in other sectors as well. Everybody is welcome to contribute, of course. Next slide, please. The decision also goes through some incentives for the contributions. So parties and non-parties are all invited to take administrative, policy, or legislative measures to incentivize users in their jurisdiction to contribute. Also, the existence of a certificate. So as a company, as you contribute, you do get a receipt, of course, for the contribution. But as you contribute to the level stated in the decision, you also get a certificate. And it excludes you from expectation to share further monetary benefit from the use of the same information for that year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of host and governance, obviously this is a big machine to govern. It is administered by the United Nations Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, which is a very high standard, very experienced office of the United Nations that manages over 200 and something funds. It has a steering committee, which is here to steer the mechanism, including the Cali Fund, and the Secretariat that serves this steering committee. I kept the future tense because currently the finest 3 in the Secretariat are the interim Secretariat for the steering committee, but eventually it will become an independent Secretariat as more funding comes in. Everything, all the oversight, all the decision, everything under this mechanism, no matter where they stand, has to be done in line with the decisions of the COP, this decision, and future decisions, of course. Next slide, please. There is not only monetary benefits, as Pierre reminded us. So there is non-monetary benefits. There's implication for databases, data users, data managers, etc. So all users should share non-monetary benefits. That's in the decision. And the support for the self-identified capacity and technical development needs and priorities. This includes capacity building for the generation of access to and use and storage of DSI should be central to those non-monetary benefit sharing. Also, the self-identified needs of Indigenous peoples and local communities can be supported through these non-monetary benefits. There is alignment, of course. We're not the only ones who work on capacity building by far. We have colleagues who do work on implementing the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development here in the Secretariat. And we also have a clearinghouse mechanism, so we work very closely with them to not duplicate any efforts and actually just build upon each other's mandates and contributions. In terms of data, so Pierre was saying data has to stay open, so we don't want to, the parties don't want to hinder research and innovation, of course. So there is a call for entities that operate database tools and models to make information available, to inform those who submit DSI of their obligations, and to require a provision of information of the country of origin on DSI, and be consistent with the fair and the care principles and open data principles within their tools. Parties and other governments that fund or sponsor or host databases are encouraged to ensure that those databases are able to actually implement those measures. Next slide, please. So here's a really nice graphic that's borrowed from a paper that's cited at the bottom of the slide, and that's part of the graphic only, but this is the multilateral mechanism. So you see the users, the non-monetary benefits, and then the monetary benefit going to the Cali Fund. I've spoken about that. Now, what does the Cali Fund do with the money it receives? So the decision talks about 50% minimum that goes to Indigenous people and local communities for their self-identified needs. So an empowering modality in this mechanism. The money also goes to governments in developing countries and economies in the transition for the purpose of the CBD objectives. For example, to support the implementation of their NBSAPs. Also, there is a provision that says that the COP might decide to allocate some of that money specifically for scientific capacity building. It can be done in the future. Next slide, please. So the work plan for DSI, obviously this decision still has some modalities that list and rates are indicative, modalities, some are not very detailed, some are not quite defined. And so there's a lot of work that was requested to the Executive Secretary from the COP so that it can refine and make those decisions in the future and quite quickly. So the you can here see that there's some studies, there's some work that goes to SBI, the review methodology. Pierre talked about COP18, and the SBI will make recommendations to COP. The COP will also receive a lot of work in itself that hasn't gone through any subsidiary body. There are studies on competitiveness and the impact of contribution rates on them for companies. There's an allocation formula, how we're going to, the Cali Fund is going to actually disperse the money in a fair and equitable manner. And there is also the vast work of the steering committee of the multilateral mechanism. I'm not going to go into any detail. My colleague Kirsty here is going to take over and walk you through this work plan. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to the wealth of questions that are coming in the chat. I am doing my best to keep up, but yes, it's a great interest, so thank you. Next, please. So thank you to Charlotte. I will now take you through the second half of the presentation today, which will detail the work that we are undergoing as a Secretariat. First, we have 3 studies that the Executive Secretary requested within 16.2. All 3 are ongoing currently, And the first one relates to a study to examine options for making DSI resources publicly available and accessible in a transparent and accountable manner. The second is a study on national and international standards for the identification of small, medium, and large entities. And then the third is a study on contribution rates, including implications for revenue generation and economic competitiveness. All of these slides, studies are going to different places. So we see the first study will be sent to SBI 7, and the remaining 2 will be sent to COP17. Next slide, please. And what you see here is what the various meetings will do with the studies. So SBI will make recommendations on possible tools and platforms such as databases for making DSI available and accessible in a transparent manner. So SBI will utilize this study alongside the submission of views that has been sought from parties, governments, indigenous peoples and local communities and relevant organizations back in 2024-2025. The second and third study, as I mentioned, will go straight to the COP. Study 3, so on contribution rates, also includes or will include a submission of views. So those will be 2 separate documents that will feed into COP17, and the COP will consider establishing thresholds and contribution rates at its 17th meeting and review them periodically thereafter. Next slide, please. Relating to the studies, we have 2 surveys open relating to the study on making options for making DSI resources publicly available and accessible. This survey is open to all colleagues and has a deadline to respond on Monday, the 16th of February. We have a second study on the contribution rates and a second survey focused at gathering views from the private sector. And the deadline to respond to this is the 27th of February. If you have any questions about these surveys, please reach out to Charlotte. Her email is in this slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now I will listen to the ARTEG Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group. This ARTEG was formed and contains experts from parties, experts from indigenous peoples and local communities, and experts from relevant organizations. For the first time just last week, the 27th to the 29th of January, again on the allocation methodology. They will be working over the coming months before meeting in Montreal, where they will analyze their work and produce a report that will go to COP in relation to COP17, determining a formula for allocation. Next slide, please. Now we have the work of the steering committee. So Charlotte reminded us how the steering committee was created at COP16 in 1602. The steering committee's mandate is to provide oversight of the operations fund host, ensuring that the fund disperses money according to the modalities. It guides the operations of the Secretariat. It will report and provide advice to COP. And it has a specific mandate to develop a methodology for the review of the effectiveness of the multilateral mechanism. We saw just a second ago that this agenda item will be considered SBI 7. So the steering committee has met twice since its inception, with 2 more meetings planned in 2026. Transparency is of utmost priority, and meeting minutes can be found on the CBD webpage as well as the Multi-Partner Trust Fund web pages. The first meeting was more of an introductory meeting where the group came together and began working on the operative documents and just to begin its work as the steering committee. And at the second meeting, several operative documents were agreed, and the steering committee began its work on substantial items. So some of the operational documents that were agreed were the rules of procedure to govern things, conflict of interest guidelines, as well as a project document on funding of the Secretariat of the Multilateral Mechanism, including the fund. Next slide, please. Just to take a very small moment to a lovely steering committee. This is them at their second meeting. Thank you. Next slide. So on to the final update of work we've been working on and undertaking here. We have created 3 guides to help all colleagues understand the Cali Fund. The guide you see here is specifically to the private sector. I need not remind you that the Cali Fund is very unique and that it relies solely on contributions from the private sector included within the multilateral mechanism. The first guide, as you see here through the many QR codes, has been translated into several languages. And then if we look at the next slide, please, we have 2 more preliminary guides which are just available in English currently, but these are guides specific to parties and specific to databases. Next slide, please. So just to recap, this is how we understand SBI 7 and COP17 to focus on DSI based on the very extensive mandate within Decision 16.2. So SBI in 16.2 will provide recommendations on the review methodology, will provide recommendations on additional modalities and possible tools and platforms, databases for making DSI available and accessible in a transparent and accountable manner. Next, we have the COP, which documents before it that I have just outlined, and it will consider these topics. The recommendations from SBI on the above topics, formula for funding from the Cali Fund. It will consider the steering committee's report and advice, thresholds and contribution rates, as well as any other items that have been identified. The final aspect of the presentation is just a flag. We have notification out currently, notification 006. This is to parties and other governments, and we're inviting them to submit information and updates on the actions they have taken in relation to Decision 6.2. Next slide. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present the wealth of work we're undertaking today, and we look forward to the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte and Kirsty. That was comprehensive and clear. Very much appreciated. Now we have, I'm just quickly glancing at the Q&A function, and I see there's a large number of comments and questions. A number of them, again, this is just at a glance and without commentary, probably don't have that much to do with actual process, but surely they're important inputs, and they will be captured subsequently, and they'll serve as food for thought for its discussions, whether it's formal or informal, go forward. So all is welcome. Did you want to, in fact, address any particular process-related questions now, or what do you think? Anything you'd like to tackle, or are we good? It's quite dense.
It's very dense. Probably just a quick one from me. So there's a question from an anonymous attendee saying, what expected to see the results and discussions of the RTEG and the steering committee. So the RTEG has met once already and the steering committee twice already. Minutes are available for the steering committee already online. And the RTEG documents for the first meeting are already available now as well. Both of those will be taken straight to COP17, so you can expect to see those in accordance with all of the other documents prepared for COP17. And I'll keep reading.
Maybe I'll address, I think, one of the elephants in the room, maybe the definition of DSI. And I actually typed an answer. I don't know if those answered questions are visible to everybody or not.
So please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically in Decision 59, there were 2 paragraphs actually relating to the definition of DSI. So as some of you might know, there was work done by an ATEG in 2019. The report was published in 2020, and it had 3 different sort of proposals for the COP on definitions of DSI. The COP came out and said basically that there are still differences of view in the room, but everybody actually agreed that we don't need to fully define DSI in order to share the benefits that arise from its use. So there's two things that happened at COP16, a little bit related to that front. One is that there was a strong sort of understanding in the room that those industries that most rely on DSI know that they do, and those who profit from it, should share benefits. And the other thing is that the first paragraph of the annex to decision 16.2, which I talked about briefly, talks about the scope, right? What DSI are we talking about? And so that paragraph was welcomed as a strong guideline for users to be able to rely on. But to this day, yes, the actual word by word definition has not been agreed by all parties. So yeah, you can stop asking in the chat. Several people asking. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ida mentioned the need to be bold, also to be courageous. So thank you, Charlotte. And I should note that actually we have an agreement we're going to hear about shortly. They made a lot of progress, but in fact they decided not to define DSI. So we'll hear from on that one shortly. Anything else that you would like to address now? And again, we will be capturing this, and people will see what others have said, commented on, and this will serve as food for thought as we go forward. So all thoughts will not be ignored.
Yeah, just a quick one maybe before I go is that several people are asking what the CBD is doing with companies that are supposed that are expected to contribute. And so we are in touch with business associations mostly because they represent so many companies each. It's not realistic for us to go company by company. Yeah. So they are a very important stakeholder. We are in contact with them and we talk to them regularly. They also talk among themselves without us, which is great. So yes, we're not just expecting for them to come to us. We also are going to them, and this is a big effort and a big strategy as well for the Cali Fund, of course. They are in our steering committee, sitting as observers, so they hear every conversation and they have a say and expressing their opinions, etc. And I believe we're going to hear from some of them later in this webinar.
Well, thank you very much, Kirsty and Charlotte and Telco, for being here today and working so closely and positively with everyone, including us. It is a pleasure. Actually, I mean that, and you really are amongst the finest. And I don't know what we would do, frankly, without you. I'm sorry not to put you on the spot or embarrass you, but this is the case where we all rely very much on the Secretariat and its experts. So thanks again. So we will now, with that, move to other forums. Yes, indeed. DSI is not limited to the CBD. In fact, it's very much alive in a number of other multilateral forums, as many of you will know. But many of us do not actually have the time or capacity to follow, at least in detail, at least in my case, to follow what's going on in some of these other key forums. So we'll spend the next 20 minutes or so being brought up to speed on DSI outside the CBD. But before we do that, I'm reminded that the chat is now open. So if you have questions or further contributions to make, please do write them into the chat. And the highlights of these issues that you do raise will be, at least some of the highlights will be mentioned at the end of the webinar. And of course, everything will be captured and ultimately digested. So I encourage you to use the chat. Unfortunately, as a moderator, I don't have the opportunity at the moment to look at the chat, but I will afterwards. And I always find it very, very valuable. I should also mention that we have, let me just double check. It looks like we have over 500 people online at the moment. So to me, that bodes very well that the interest is strong. And once again, thank you everyone for being here. So we're very fortunate today to have members of 3 key secretariats from whom we can learn directly what's going on and happening in DSI, including in the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the International Treaty, the WHO, and the BBNJ Agreement. Let's start with, let's go to Rome, and we'll start with the International Treaty. Alvaro Toledo from the Secretariat, I think IT Secretariat is with us. There he is, camera's on. Sorry to be so slow, Alvaro. Thanks again for being here, and as always, it's a pleasure to see you, and I find it very reassuring. So thanks very much, and over to you to let us know what's been going on and what the projection forward might be. All yours.
Thanks, Tim, for the introduction and for all the love. We certainly need it. So just a very brief intervention from the treaty side to just give a bit of an update of the recent meeting of the governing body. But before doing so, I will also want to give a bit of an update also on the current functioning of the multilateral system, as basically that's the multilateral system on access and benefit sharing of the treaty. That's what the governing body was working to enhance. So it's clear that the governing body has regularly emphasized the importance of enhancing the functioning of the multilateral system on access and benefit sharing of the plant treaty. But it's also important to highlight that the governing body is dealing, in addition to the MLS enhancement, is dealing regularly with DSI as a separate agenda item at each session, and it's also dealing with the implementation of the multilateral system in the same regular manner. So where are we with the current functioning of the multilateral system? And there's a recent report that we presented in Lima, basically highlights that we have more than 2.6 million of plant genetic resources holdings available through the multilateral system. That's basically half of more or less of all the holdings reported globally, and represent an increase, a doubling since the beginning of the discussions on the enhancement of the multilateral system. So we have seen a significant growth of the system over the past decade, while the system was being enhanced through the negotiations. So in terms of data, we're almost at 17 SMTAs transferred, or contracts transfer agreement, with more than 115 contracts already transferred to almost every country in the world, more than 189 countries. So more than 7 million materials have been transferred since 2007. So that reveals a bit the importance of the exchange happening within the multilateral system, and it also gives an impression of how important it is to enhance that system that is so important for training, breeding, and capacity building in the area of agriculture. So acknowledging this fact, the membership of the treaty set up a process to enhance the multilateral system by the end of 2025, and in 2023, the governing body identified 3 hotspots to resolve in this negotiation process. One being DSI, as I think most of you know, but connected also to the expansion of the coverage of the crops included in the system, and the payment structure and rates of the new system, in particular the subscription mechanisms to an enhanced system. So we had, during the last 2 years, a very intense work conducted by an intergovernmental working group that included all relevant stakeholders, the CGIAR and research and academy, farmer organizations, civil society and steel industry. And the working group submitted its report to the governing body, as well as there was also a report from the co-chairs. And the governing body did acknowledge the significant work undertaken throughout the biennium that they took into consideration. So during the session, the chairperson of the governing body conducted informal exchanges among delegations and Friends of the Chairs consultations that included participants from all regional groups to help try to build consensus, starting from the report of the working group. At the end of the session, the chair developed a compromise proposal, which included possible intersessional processes and issues for consideration of the governing body at its next session, in the 12th session. And the governing body took note of that chair's compromise proposal on the enhancement of the functioning of the multilateral system, and that compromise proposal is included now in the report of the session as Appendix C. The report of the session has just been made available in English in our treaty website as of, I believe, yesterday, so you can all take a look. It's available now. In terms of next steps, it's the bureau of the 12th session of the governing body that would have to decide how to structure the agenda and discussion of the next session of the governing body, including all the issues that we've touched upon in this brief presentation. So that's it from my side, team.
Thank you very much, Alvaro, for I think painting a clear and honest picture of where things are at. Obviously, there's more to come, and that's the nature of multilateral affairs. And as you well know, working in a secretariat and working on these issues for so long, it's never a straight line, but eventually, I like to think we get there. So thank you very, very much for joining us. I know you two are quite busy at the moment. We'll now turn to Dan Hogan-Dobler from the WHO. Thanks, Dan, for joining us. I know it's been extremely busy for you as well. You've got a lot of meetings going on at the moment, and I know you're very stretched. But thank you for agreeing to be here. Maybe you could say a few words about the Intergovernmental Working Group. I know I think it's met very recently, in the last couple of weeks maybe, and I did do a little bit of reading. I don't follow WHO affairs more closely enough, but I do have the impression that things are moving ahead in that quarter. So maybe you can give us a few details on what's happened and what's ahead as you work towards the WHA in May. It's all yours, Dan.
Sure. Thanks so much, Tim, and thanks to the organizers also for inviting us to participate. We really like to value these opportunities to talk cross-sectorally, which we don't always have those opportunities. So really do appreciate it. I know time is short, so I'll just jump right into the discussion. Maybe what I'll do, instead of jumping right into the IGWIG, is I'll take a step back and talk a little bit about the WHO Pandemic Agreement, just so everyone's on the same page. The Pandemic Agreement was adopted at the Health Assembly last May, and it establishes a pathogen access and benefit sharing system. We call it the PAB system. It covers both pathogen materials and digital sequence information. So Article 12 of the agreement lays out the key ABS elements for the treaty, but member states decided that they also needed an annex to elaborate the provisions that would govern this access and benefit sharing, this PAB system. And they also decided that the Pandemic Agreement would only be open for signature once that annex was also agreed. So you needed the WHOPA and the annex together before it could be open for signature. So last May, they established this member state-led intergovernmental working group, the IGWIG, not very elegantly named, but that's what we call it, the IGWIG, to draft and negotiate the annex. The IGWIG is co-chaired by representatives from Brazil and the UK, with vice chairs from Australia, Eswatini, Qatar, and Thailand. And together they represent all the WHO regions. They met for the first time last July, and they've had 4 formal meetings, in addition to a lot of informal meetings and dialogues, including some week-long informals. So it's been kind of a combination of the two methods. We have 2 additional week-long negotiations. As Tim mentioned, it's a very busy time for us. The first one starts this Monday, just after our executive board closes. It'll go from 9 to 14 February. And then the final session is scheduled to be held from 23 to 28 March this year. And as you rightly noted, Tim, the World Health Assembly will consider the outcome of the IGWIG in May. So that's kind of the history and what we're projecting into the future. So let me turn a little bit to what the IGWIG is discussing. The meetings focus mostly on negotiating on-screen text, and that's supplemented by informal discussions where there's areas of divergence. So they'll break out into smaller groups and discuss. Familiar to many people who have been involved in these international processes. And also familiar to many of you who have been involved in other ABS negotiations. I think you'll find the topics that are being discussed quite familiar. Some examples are how to define pathogen access and benefit sharing materials and sequence information. So what's the scope? What should be the criteria for participating manufacturers? What should be the triggers for benefit sharing? And what benefits to share in each scenario? What are the expectations of databases? That was one that came up a lot, I remember, in the CBD context as well. And another one from the CBD context that's coming up in ours is how the system should address traditional knowledge and the rights of IP&LCs. That's been a very important area of discussion. Of course, coherence with domestic ABS legislation and international ABS agreements is important, and how we ensure the obligations aren't stacked across. But then I wanted to focus a little bit too on some unique aspects, I think, of the PAB system when we discuss these other agreements. First is that our objective, of course, is public health. And the WHO PA is very clear that the objective is to prevent, prepare for, and respond to pandemics. So there are a lot of interlinkages with the environment, but it's really a public health focus. Second, the WHO PA focuses very heavily on specific and carefully defined non-monetary benefit sharing, which I think is distinct from a lot of the other agreements which focus more on monetary benefit sharing. And we focus especially on vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, which are useful in public health emergencies. And then finally, while some of the obligations may apply at all times, some elements are triggered by external events. So for example, the declaration of a pandemic emergency or a public health emergency of international concern. So these are some elements that I think that are a bit unique to our negotiations. And then finally, I just wanted to conclude by saying that throughout the negotiations, member states have consistently emphasized the importance of coherence between the PAB system and then other ABS instruments that we've been discussing today. And to that end, I'd really like to thank our colleagues from the CBD, FAO, BBNJ, and many others who have really generously shared their time and expertise with us as we've gone through these negotiations over several years. And the coming months are going to be really crucial for us, and we're really grateful for your ongoing support. So I hope this has been useful. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions now or later. And that's all I have. Thanks again. Back to you, Tim.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. You covered a lot of landscape in a very clear way. And I know more and realize I need to know more as well. So thank you very much. And I find, the distinctiveness of each forum and the commonality, I think it's fascinating where things are the same and maybe things are a little bit different. And the degree of collaboration, cooperation across the secretariats, I noted that, and I've seen that over the years, and that can be nothing but a good thing. So thank you, Dan, and to your colleague, Steve, for being available today. Very much appreciated. But we're not finished in terms of other forums. So last but not least, I've got the pleasure of giving the floor to Bingshui Chu Li, a familiar face in the BBNJ circles, and he's joining us today from New York, the BBNJ Agreement Secretariat. Welcome to our webinar, and thanks for joining us. As discussed, I'm looking to you to provide a 5-minute briefing on the BBNJ agreement. It's an agreement I followed, been involved in over many years, not so much recently, and maybe that's why you actually came to conclusions. And we have an agreement. So congratulations on that. So you have, I think, to share with us a lot of progress and hitting a lot of milestones over the last few months and last year, that's for sure. So you've gone from conclusion of the negotiations, adoption of the treaty, and of course recently entry into force, and now your implementation is beginning in earnest. So a lot done and a lot remains to be done. I actually wanted to ask you a specific question, but I'm not allowed to, related to the unique batch identifier, but maybe at some point offline we can talk about that, which I find fascinating. But maybe over to you just to give us broad brush strokes of what's going on and what's ahead. All yours.
Thank you, Tim, and good day, everyone. So many thanks to the organizers for inviting UN Dualos to contribute to this webinar. So in the next few minutes, I would offer a brief review on DSI under the BBNJ agreement and where we stand now. Next slide, please. So for those less familiar, the BBNJ Agreement stands for the agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and accessible use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. So it applies to areas beyond national jurisdiction, which includes the high seas and the international seabed area beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. So a key recent development, as just noted by Tim, is that the agreement has recently entered into force on 17th January 2026, so just over 2 weeks ago. Next slide, please. So agreement has 145 signatories and now also 85 parties and counting. Next slide, please. Due to time constraint, of course, I was saying was total 5 minutes. I will try, but I will not cover all aspects of how the agreement addresses DSI, but will highlight some key aspects. The agreement, among others, addresses marine genetic resources, or MGRs, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Relevant provisions apply to activities with respect to both MGRs of areas beyond national jurisdiction and DSI. And it also does not define DSI, which followed earlier discussion on this. The agreement establishes a notification system for such activities, supported by a clearinghouse mechanism established under the agreement. Notifications are required at 3 stages: prior to in-situ collection of MGRs, post-connection, and also at the stage of utilization. DSI is particularly relevant at the post-collection and utilization stages. Upon receiving a pre-collection notification, the clearinghouse mechanism under the agreement will automatically generate a BBNJ standardized batch identifier, which was also just mentioned by Tim, which together with the notification system is central to achieving the monitoring and transparency of activities with respect to MGRs and DSI under the agreement. Parties are required to ensure that DSI held in databases under their jurisdiction can be identified as originating from areas beyond national jurisdiction in line with current international practice and also to the extent practicable. Databases are also to prepare biannual aggregate reports on access to DSI linked to the BBNJ standardized batch identifier and make them available to an access and benefit sharing committee. The Access and Benefit Sharing Committee established under the agreement is mandated to make recommendations to the conference of the parties to the agreement, which I will refer to as BBNJ COP, on relevant matters. So it may also consult and facilitate the exchange of information with other instruments, frameworks, and bodies on activities under its mandate, including benefit sharing, the use of DSI MGRs, among others. The agreement also requires the fair and equitable sharing of both monetary and non-monetary benefits arising from activities with respect to MGRs and DSI, and requires parties to take necessary measures to that end. Next slide, please. Under the agreement, access to DSI is a form of non-monetary benefit sharing. Other forms include access to samples, open access to fair scientific data, capacity building, and the transfer of marine technology, among other forms. Next slide, please. Monetary benefits are to be shared through payments to a special fund, which forms part of the financial mechanism established under the agreement. The special fund will, among others, fund capacity building projects, assist developing states parties in implementing the agreement, and support conservation and accessible use programs by indigenous peoples and local communities. An initial modality applies from entry into force of the agreement until the BBNJ COP decides on the modalities for the sharing of monetary benefits arising from the utilization of MGRs and DSI. Under this initial modality, developed states parties are required to make annual contributions to the special fund, set at 50% of their assessed contributions to the budget to be adopted by the BBNJ COP. The modalities to be decided by the BBNJ COP for the sharing of monetary benefits arising from the utilization of MGRs and DSI may include milestone payments, payments linked to the commercialization of products, tiered fees based on levels of activity, or other forms as determined by the BBNJ COP. The agreement provides that in deciding on the modalities for the sharing of monetary benefits from the use of DSI, the COP must take into account the recommendations of the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee while recognizing that such modalities should be mutually supportive of and adaptable to other access and benefit sharing instruments. Next slide, please. Finally, turning to where we are now, COP1 of the BBNJ Agreement will need to be convened by the UN Secretary General within 1 year following the agreement's entry into force. So that is before next January 17th. A preparatory commission has been established by the UN General Assembly to prepare for the entry into force of the agreement and the convening of COP1. Its third session will take place next month. The PrepCon is considering 3 clusters of issues which would have significant implications for the future implementation of the agreement. While the Preparatory Commission is not specifically considering DSI, several of the issues under consideration are relevant to the implementation of DSI-related provisions, which I just mentioned. In particular, the PrepCon is addressing first governance issues. This includes the terms of reference, operation modalities, rules of procedure, and the member selection process for the subsidiary bodies, including the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee. Second, issues pertaining to the operation of the clearinghouse mechanism, which include, among others, process for generating the BBNJ standardized batch identifier. And the last, financial rules and the financial resources and mechanism, which include, among others, arrangements to give effect to the provisions on the special fund and also the scale of assessed contributions. Next slide, please. So this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions either here or after with other opportunities. And so I saw some questions coming in the Q&A function. I will try to answer it as much as I can. Thank you. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Benju. Just a quick question back to you. The PrepCom, will that take place in New York, or has that been determined yet?
It will be in New York, yes, from 23rd March to 2nd of April in New York, headquarters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you to your colleagues at Dualis, as always. A fine bunch as well. Yeah, so maybe you can respond to some through the chat or through the Q&A. I think I can see several questions that only you, Benju, could fully and adequately answer. So thank you again for being with us. Now we're going to move to a different subject. We're back to perhaps DSI more properly and fully in the CBD context, but it's certainly not irrelevant to any of the other forum discussions. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Eduardo Silva Bessa, a good colleague from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Chile. As many of you know, Chile, together with the United Kingdom, has been spearheading the Friends of the Cali Fund. So we've asked Eduardo to join us and to perhaps give us a few words about the progress that's being made through the Friends of the Cali Fund. I believe that the Friends of the Fund met with a range of folks in the margins of UNIA 7 in Nairobi. I think it was before the end of last year. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, if you're able to, Eduardo, and maybe, in fact, remind us what the purpose of the Friends is, if that's not clear, and what's been going on and what next steps are being considered. So thanks again for joining us, and it's over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation and for that also that introduction, and have to see the many familiar faces in this meeting, and also it's amazing the number of participants, and it's very clear that this DSI mechanism and what is happening with the Cali Fund is provoking a lot of interest in many actors. And in my presentation, it's not really a presentation, it's a short speech. I would like to present some ideas about this initiative that United Kingdom and Chile has promoted, that we call the Group of Friends of the Cali Fund. But first, I would like to mention that for many governments, including developing countries like Chile, we recognize that one of the most relevant outcomes of the CBD COP16 in Colombia was the adoption of the modalities of the DSI mechanism and the creation of the Cali Fund. We truly have a lot of expectations in terms of the ability of this mechanism and the Cali Fund to mobilize international finance to provide support for developing countries to achieve the different goals and different activities under in this app, and also install another instruments, and also to fulfill the purposes of the convention. And one of the main specific or unique characteristic of the Cali Fund is that it's the first international fund, a multilateral fund, that will receive contributions only from the private sector, and mainly from large companies in sectors that are making use of DSI, such as pharmaceutical, cosmetics, biotechnology, among others. And the Cali Fund, in the view of countries like Chile, also United Kingdom, and the other members of this group, is a transformative financial mechanism that is able to provide financial support to achieve very key goals and activities. As I said before, it provides support for the NBSAT, that is the main instrument to achieve the Kunming-Montreal framework. Also, to benefit indigenous people and local communities, is the first fund that established that 50% of the funding will be allocated to these groups, and also to advance scientific research and increase the capacity of developing countries to develop and access DSI databases. If we see the map and we see how it is the distribution of the DSI databases, we will see that there are kind of black holes in many areas of developing countries, in many regions and sub-regions, like South America and also Africa, where there is no development, or very minimum development of DSI databases and capacity. And this fund will provide financial support to promote the development of those databases. But we, as a government, we recognize that one of the main challenges of the Cali Fund and the mechanism is to really mobilize and provide incentives to receive significant contributions from the private sector. And one example of the challenges is how some companies make it clear that they still perceive a significant risk of duplication of obligations between the Cali Fund and the national benefit sharing legislation, or measures that cover DSI at the local level. And as a government, we believe that the interaction between the multilateral mechanism and the national regulations need to be addressed to ensure that the ability of the Cali Fund to mobilize efficiently private sector finance. And in this context, the key concept and the element that is behind this initiative of the group of friends of the Cali Fund is to build trust in the mechanism, and to promote collaboration between governments and the private sector. And in this context, the United Kingdom and Chile joined efforts to create an informal and political space of collaboration that we call the Group of Friends of the Cali Fund. We invite several countries, and we are still engaging in conversation with other countries to be part of this group. Currently, the members of the groups are Chile, the United Kingdom, Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands. All of these governments share the common interest in the success of the mechanism, and they are willing to develop joint initiatives to and also create political momentum to incentivize private sector contribution. And the main purpose of this group are first, to build awareness, momentum, and support for the Cali Fund across relevant sectors and platforms. Also collaborate to foster trust, build capacity, and share good practices. And very relevant, to address the barriers for the operationalization of the Cali Fund. Also, this group are working together to motivate users in all countries to contribute to the fund. And one key aspect that we are working together is to create and establish initiatives to provide legal and policy clarity for users of DSI, in terms of how will be addressed this interaction between local legislations and the multilateral mechanism. We are also working together across relevant multilateral processes and benefit sharing instruments to promote coherence and complementarity between all of them. We heard from the other speakers how DSI, or the biological diversity benefit sharing, is addressed across different multilateral agreements and forums. And we believe that from this group, we can work together to ensure that there is coherence among those different multilateral agreements. And one of the key on specific actions that we are working together is to launch a political declaration that now we have proposed to the members and also to other countries to include, among other commitments, the recognition that payments made to the Cali Fund will be recognized for compliance with national legislations that cover DSI. And we consider that providing this legal certainty would act as an incentive for the private sector to contribute and to capitalize the fund. And this will boost participation and will also increase the mobilization of private finance. We consider that the alignment of domestic and international benefit sharing mechanism is very relevant, because we need to ensure coherence, and we need to also provide clarity and certainty for the private actors about how this interaction will be addressed. And we consider that the combination of providing certainty to companies and increasing the payments to the Cali Fund will progressively generate greater confidence in the mechanism. It will be like a snowball, and we are very optimistic. And but we understand that the amount of contribution now is very low. But we are optimistic that we can create this effect of the snowball, and we are able to build trust, and we are able to provide this legal certainty. Companies will start to contribute to the fund, and this will create more incentive to other companies to also make their contributions. And in this context, I would like to note that the Cali Fund has received the first request for contribution from a company based in the United Kingdom. And this is a company that is not under the thresholds, but still is a company that wants to contribute and show commitment with this fund. And finally, I would like to mention that under this initiative, the United Kingdom organized with the collaboration of Chile an activity during UNIA 7 that we invite several countries to also join efforts in this group of friends. And we are having conversation with many other governments, and we believe that the number of members of the group will increase in the near future. And we also would like to invite many other governments and also private associations and entities to start conversations with our group, because the main purpose of this group is, as I said before, to build trust and create a space of collaboration between the private sector and governments. With that, I'm also open to answer any question or any comment related with this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo. As always, plenty of food for thought, but plenty of evidence of much going on. Some serious thinking among countries and people that care to effect progress. I'm very grateful for you being here today. It's hard not to comment and react. I mean, in a very, I think, would be a constructive way. But you remind us of not just the hurdles that we need to get over, but also ways of either getting over them or around them and working together. You know, the word trust just sticks with me. It's not the mark of a CBD over many years, unfortunately. But I think we're entering a new era, as you pointed out, where we're understanding, and maybe there's some changes, but adjustments to understanding what our roles are, respective roles are. And clearly, as you've pointed out, there's roles for industry, and big or small, but also roles for government and, of course, for IP&LCs. I think it's an important point as the CBD and Decision 16.2 has shifted things a little bit in terms of expectations on who implements what. But we all have a role to play, as you very rightly point out. So thank you very much again, Eduardo. We're now going to shift to, it's not really a panel, but I call it a panel, a stakeholder and IP&LC panel. In a very quick succession, I'm going to ask a single question, so only one question, the same question to a group of people, panelists who you will recognize them, but I will introduce them very briefly as I give them the floor to speak. But let me start with the question that I'm going to pose to our speakers. And this is it. It's a simple one. From where you sit, and if you had 5 minutes to talk directly to CBD parties about what would be a desirable outcome at COP17, what would you need to do? What would we need to do, whether it's collectively as all of us or as you or a stakeholder and IP&LC group, what would need to be done in the interim period, so the remaining period between now and the meeting in Armenia, to achieve this outcome, this desired outcome? So that's a simple question. Maybe the answer is not as simple as the question, but I think it's a good one. And I think we should all be asking ourselves, not just what we would like to happen, but how we would actually make it materialize. So we'll start with Preston Hardison. Preston, I can't see, but I'm assuming your camera's on. Thank you very much for being here, and I know it's early where you are. I assume if you're at home. So thank you for getting up so early and being, as always, so gracious and generous with your time. I think everyone knows Preston, but I'll just remind you that he's been on the scene, very active for many years, in particular as a co-lead, more recently negotiator in DSI for the IFB, for the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. But you've played many other roles, supportive and leading on ABS and DSI over the years. So thank you, Preston, and I'll give you the floor for about 5 minutes or so.
Okay, thank you. I have sent a slide to Tim. I know he's not checking his email and it came late. I'm not going to show it. I'm going to read it because if I read it, it's about 4 minutes long. If I show it in a slide, it'll take about all day. I also want to say there are no simple questions, just simple answers. This is an IP&LC-ish perspective. We are going to have a meeting on Monday where the IFB will hammer out its suggestions. So these are just my comments, and don't take them as the official Indigenous or local community word. So I'll just start. First, I want to start with the future selection of representatives of IP&LCs for the OTEGs and the steering committee. I believe there is a lack of clarity in Enclosure 4 on how selection should occur. And we had holiday interference with our ability to organize nominations. So they just kind of came in from separate organizations and was decided by the Bureau. Paragraph 2 on the composition of the steering committee, subparagraph 3 says, according to established procedures on the basis of nominations from parties and observer groups. However, this is a little bit different process because it focuses on 50% of the funds at least go to IP&LCs. And we believe it should follow the standard set by the Nagoya Protocol, where the the compliance committee, the IFB, selects the representatives, and that we go through our own internal process to decide which names should be forwarded. Of course, there may be some objections by parties And we believe that those can be worked out by consultation during the meetings. On the steering committee itself, we believe that the steering committee should expand its process a bit. It should invite IP&LC experts and other experts to make submissions on specific topics. We have always been particularly concerned about the database issues contained in 16.2, the annex on modalities, paragraphs 8 through 12. And this should be done in consultation with the IAFB. Work on data governance issues needs to be accelerated. Consideration should look wider than the 3 pillars of the convention. AI and genetic modification technologies pose significant challenges for unregulated and open data. And I'd just like to point out 3 separate current events that illustrate this. We just discovered a biolab in the United States in Arizona 2 days ago. And several people that were exposed to this biolab got very ill and sick. So they were obviously toying around with microorganisms. There's the new Colossal Biovault and World Preservation Lab agreement with the Museum of the Future in Dubai. And this is a private organization and a private agreement. We're not sure about what kind of control this has. Some of the issues are noble for conserving species to save them from extinction, but they also have economic interest in creating and resurrecting extinct species. And this is occurring without any control of the states, as far as I know. COP should not ignore biosafety and other risks. Pierre is also correct. We will necessarily need to address synthetic genetics and synthetic genomics. I also left out that scientists just created de novo a phage for medicinal uses. And I'm not saying this is bad, but this does need to be looked at because it also poses risks. The IFB has accepted that data governance will not require granular rules. Guidance is provided by the fair, care, and trust principles for digital repositories. We also must not forget the UNESCO recommendation on open science principles of keeping data as open as possible, but as closed as necessary, and this should be adopted. Necessary refers to the control required to prevent adverse impacts on rights, privacy, and security, among other issues. Research and commercial use of IP&LC DSI that aligns with their cultural values and rights, and that targets projects that conserve and protect their biodiversity and ecosystems should significantly reduce conflicts and produce effective outcomes. Compliance with the Nagoya Protocol and national GR-ATK rules must ensure that these are fully respected in the transition from GRs to DSI published in open access databases. No sharing outside bilateral agreements should occur without explicit consent. Significant gaps remain. Nagoya Protocol Article 6 does not universally establish IP&LC rights to genetic resources, only in those cases where states recognize them. This is at odds with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. All states should recognize the rights of IP&LCs to genetic resources. As a voluntary regime, companies can go farther than Nagoya and ensure no genetic resources are taken from their lands, waters, and territories or collected without PIC, FPIC, or approval and involvement. As noted by the Friends of the Cali Fund, this is not only a legal issue. It involves equity, respecting the rights of IP&LCs, and effective biodiversity positive outcomes. States should also look into issues surrounding undemarcated and uncertain territorial boundaries. We must not pretend that this is a perfect world and that this knowledge is perfectly known. The 1 centimeter over the boundary line issue also exists. We need to make sure that we don't play gotcha with Indigenous peoples and local communities and collect close to their boundaries, and again, address these issues in a balanced and equitable way. We also have the issues of GRs on lands and waters traditionally used and occupied by IP&LCs. We dropped this issue during the negotiations because they were very difficult and we needed to get the decision to go through, but they still remain. And of course, we have the principles, the Ouagadougou voluntary guidelines, and I'm not going to present it, but the Code of Ethical Conduct. This needs to be implemented in line with Enclosure 4G to provide legal certainty to providers and users of digital sequence information on genetic resources. Turning to the AUTEG on allocation, I have 5 points. Regional and north-south allocations, particularly in regards to IP&LCs in developing countries, need to be developed, which may require setting percentages and providing basements and ceilings. Thank you, Paul Oldham, for that observation. Criteria for allocations. Indirect and direct contributions. We tend to focus on direct restoration projects, but we also need to remind everybody we have to keep the conservation traditions and values alive. So those kinds of things should be counted. Criteria for projects should be organized into relatively simple categories and formulas, at least at first, because the more criteria you have, the more difficult it is likely to be to rank applications. Allocation to building broad capacity and awareness among IP&LCs to engage with the Cali Fund need to ensure that funds are available and equitably shared and shared broadly. This builds trust and distributes significant benefits that will be necessary to the success of the fund. We also need criteria for IP&LCs to apply for and receive funds directly through the institutions selected by them. There's an urgent need to develop criteria for identifying needs and requirements for receiving funds, including addressing overhead cost. Finally, on the process, I believe it's a little thin, and for future roadmaps post COP17 need more robust consultation and input processes, much like we had during the run-up to the decision. There should be calls for further input. The Secretariat and donors should consider supporting processes such as the ABS initiative beyond the COP17 to provide support for the steering committee, AUTEG experts, IP&LCs, and observers to contribute. Finally, there must be sufficient funding to meet the biodiversity conservation gap. We know these are difficult times for international relations and economic stability. But I remind everyone that the United Nations is a principality of peace, established to peacefully work out issues. These conflicts are temporal issues, while extinction is forever. The world has acquired, sometimes legally and sometimes not, a vast legacy and bequest from indigenous peoples and local communities. And indigenous peoples and local communities today are the most significant contributors to the remaining diversity of life on Earth. They do not seek to profit economically, but expect reciprocity for the gifts that have been acquired. They seek to live peacefully and security in their homelands and expect sufficient resources to repair the damage that often comes from outside their lands and respect for their ways of life. The future of biodiversity depends on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Preston, for being here and for sharing, and actually sharing a lot in, I'm sorry, a very compressed amount of time. So again, I appreciate it. Now, we will, as rapidly as possible, move to our next speaker, who's probably very much a familiar face to everyone, Yerevan Oliveira from Brazil. He's joined us, I think, this morning from Belém, if not mistaken. As you will know, he is the scientific director at Vale Technology Institute Sustainable Development. And well, without further ado, welcome, Yerevan, and over to you.
Thank you, Tim. I'll be quick here. It's one question. I have many, but by COP17, one thing that I would really like to see is us moving from debating on how share benefits on DSI to actually demonstrating that benefit sharing can build scientific capacity, innovation, and conservation outcomes, especially in mega diverse countries such as Brazil, and the Amazon, where I am at now. And this matters because today, as we all know, most of the world's biological diversity is in the global south, but most of the capacity to analyze and transform this information and commercialize it remains concentrated elsewhere. So open access to sequence data has transformed science and innovation globally, but unless new initiatives on the multilateral DSI mechanism are designed carefully, I think we will continue to reproduce extraction now in digital form rather than correcting it. So I would very much like to see the demonstration that we can do it. And actually, we are running large-scale projects on accessing DSI here in Brazil, demonstrating that it is possible. Clear political recognition that benefit sharing is not only about compensation, but about capacity, about enabling countries to generate their own science, innovation, and bio-based products using DSI. So an explicit link between DSI benefits and national knowledge systems, including universities, public research institutes, indigenous organizations, and local innovation ecosystem is important. Now, the word DSI is necessary, and the benefit sharing is significant for conservation, but it should also enable biodiversity-rich countries to become biodiversity knowledge powers. And what we need then is to, in a collective way, governments, companies, and scientific enterprise come together to construct this. First, using benefit sharing to build capacity, not dependency. Non-monetary benefits must be elevated from side notes to core outcomes, including long-term investment in genomics, bioinformatics, and computational infrastructure in mega-diverse countries. Support for open, regionally governed sequence analysis platforms, not just global repositories. I mean, we have plenty of very useful global repositories that can be used, but the analytical platforms must be implemented. Sustainable training pipelines. Sometimes I see training that is they come and go, but we need to do it in a sustainable way using local data as well. This approach has already been recognized as essential to ensuring that DSI benefit sharing strengthens conservation and sustainable use rather than constraining research. Also, anchor DSI governance in inclusion and trust benefit sharing. We work only if it's socially legitimate, meaning that we need to ensure that indigenous peoples and local communities are recognized not just as beneficiaries, but as knowledge holders and research partners, consistent with the CBD principles. So supporting community-governed data frameworks where traditional people and genomic data intersect with culturally appropriate safeguards is important, making it transparent, making the DSI contributions to allocate funds for this matter. Finally, engage global community companies as partners in the value creation. Global companies should use DSI extensively, such as in pharmaceuticals, agriculture, cosmetics, biotech. The multilateral mechanism gives us a chance to reset this relationship in this period. Companies can co-invest in R&D hubs in biodiversity-rich countries, share competitive tools, pipelines, and training linked to DSI use, including local capacities, because there is actually plenty capacity. What we haven't seen really is the full pipeline being implemented in mega-diverse countries. Companies can participate in co-development models where innovation products and benefits are rooted locally. While this is not about charity, this is more about creating value in the chain and creating a more resilient and ethical innovation system. So I think COP17 will really benefit by being able to demonstrate that this can be done, enabling research institutions, supporting indigenous-led biodiversity initiatives, generating local products, startups, and also conservation solutions. So with this mechanism, I think the CBD can deliver fairness without undermining science, which we are all concerned with. So my final message is I think we can use the DSI mechanism not only to redistribute value, but to redistribute capability. And we can also benefit share with innovation to benefit the innovation from the ground up. So if we do that in the period of COP17, I think we can reach COP17 with something that can be demonstrated how we can approach strengthening science in mega diverse countries. So that's a quick view. Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guilherme. Always good to see you, and always good to hear your thoughts, which are always concrete and I think we would agree very constructive. Let's now move to our third speaker. Jasmina Muninovic is Bayer Science Fellow, I think I got this right, and Head of Genetic Resources at Bayer Crop Science. Jasmina, it's good to see you. I think you too are a very familiar face. And without further ado, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you to the organizers for having me today. Indeed, I'm a science fellow in Bayer, and I'm also the head of genetic resources as a trained plant breeder and population geneticist. But I also have the honor to serve as chair of the ABS task force at the International Chamber of Commerce and the coordination group of genetic resources at the International Seed Federation. So this cross-sector global exposure gives me a broader perspective about, ABS across the life science sector. So whilst there is a lot of detail and complexity in the ABS, I think it is vitally important that we always keep in mind what the end goal is: financial resources flow to preserve nature, and the economy transition towards sustainable models that internalize environmental values. And for the private sector, this environmental sustainability is central to long-term success. And to Pierre's remark, we are aware of the urgency of biodiversity risks. Many companies already invest in improving the environmental impact of their operations and supply chains, or in collaborations where biodiversity benefits. So we see the MLM as another opportunity to address much needed resource flow for biodiversity conservation, provided that it reduces existing complexity and encourages innovation fueled both by private and public investments in novel and more sustainable solutions. Specifically, it is essential to simplify and to reduce the complexity of the current ABS landscape so that benefit sharing is workable, compliance is effective, and continued investment is incentivized. We had hoped that COP16 would deliver such a facilitating outcome. Instead, it introduced an additional system and an extra layer of risk and expectations atop existing frameworks. There are perhaps three major challenges that are arising from the CBD COP decision needing our attention, which, by the way, were published in the Nature Biotechnology article last September, which I also co-authored. So first, the narrow scope that does not reflect how public DSI is actually used in R&D and product development, benefit sharing rates which are not aligned with the commercial value that is derived from publicly available DSI, and already mentioned low legal certainty provided by the MLM, where the legal effects of potential certificates and exemptions that are relative to national laws remain largely unclear. So whilst we are looking at COP17, we all need to work together to continue to build a robust system that would contribute to biodiversity conservation in a predictable, sustainable way and at scale. Practically, that would mean we should address the critical weaknesses in the MLM and the Cali Fund and transform them into elements that will be workable, achievable, and compelling for business. And then to take these three mentioned concerns, the publication also offered some considerations. So on the payments and legal certainty, it is essential to enable that benefit sharing payments are proportionate with the level of the benefits that are created and with the degree of license to operate and compliance recognition that companies would obtain across different countries and geographies. Clear and aligned rules across different mechanisms would also align and maximize value and incentives for DSI users. As we already heard today, different multilateral ABS mechanisms are highly relevant to many companies. Eliminating the risk of obligation stacking and simplifying compliance would really be essential. And finally, to broaden the scope beyond publicly available DSI over time, we know it's challenging, but it would be a strong incentive given the relatively modest contribution that publicly available DSI provide to the final commercial value of products and services. the way that public DSI is commonly used, which is often in mixtures with other DSI and with genetic resources, and also the prospects of innovation and technology developments in the future, making it future-proof. So far, the Cali Fund is not attracting meaningful contributions, which we are aware will attract negative criticism at COP17. But from the private sector view, this is an important signal that the current design of the MLM does not align with business realities and that we all still need to work together. Right now, companies across different sectors are specifically concerned about the design and methodology of the CBD survey on rates. More specifically, with confidentiality around the sensitive financial data that is requested, the use of non-agreed definitions like DSI, direct indirect use, and the overall shortcomings in the survey design. We would strongly encourage the CBD Secretariat to supplement this survey with company interviews and a transparent analysis methodology so that the results of the study as a whole are meaningful and credible to solving the challenges that will be negotiated at COP. To conclude, private sector stands ready. We want to engage constructively in collaborative dialogue with all stakeholders. We must continue to build trust and deeply consider innovative, workable solutions that will ensure predictable, durable outcomes that will mobilize resources for biodiversity. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Jasmina.
I think I used my time very well. So.
No, I was going to compliment you.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps I could learn even more from you. Yeah, so thank you for your
Thank
brevity,
you,
but your clarity. And I'm actually struck by how clear our speakers have been, and very, I mean, concrete, obviously positive, talking about tangibles, but very clear. And I think this also bodes quite very well, actually, as we move forward, as we seek more clarity, of course. Now I'm going to ask Paul to put your camera on, please, and I will introduce you while you do so. Paul Oldham, again, a familiar face. He's the founder of Tierra Viva AI, Artificial Intelligence, a new startup firm that's using AI to promote biodiversity-based innovation and local solutions to global environmental challenges. He's also director at One World Analytics. Paul, as many of us know, in November, your company announced it had made a contribution to the Cali Fund. I think Eduardo alluded to it. It was the first contribution, as a matter of fact, so congratulations on that, Paul. You've heard the question I posed to the other panelists, and you also heard they had the benefit of hearing their responses. Maybe you could share us very briefly, because last we were running out of time, some thoughts with us before we turn to the next segment. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. I think the easiest thing to do probably is to simply agree with Preston. Also, I think issues around data governance, AI, and AI, I think, is a topic for discussion across multiple thematic areas of the convention and indeed of wider society. I mean, I'm struck, for example, the UK is hosting IPBES this week and preparing the IPBES Business and Biodiversity Assessment. So the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, BES, is being extremely active there. And I think it could be very useful to see what the outcomes of that are. With respect to Guillermo's comments, I think I kind of really wholeheartedly agree with many of these, particularly the creation of biodiversity knowledge powers in biodiversity-rich countries such as Amazonian countries, the development of full data product development pipelines. And I think the point about regional platforms is actually really important. I think what has been seriously underestimated in the debates is the sheer volume of data that is involved and the sheer volume of data that is pushed out by next generation sequencing machines. And I think also we come back to kind of data governance and data sovereignty kind of issues in relation to that volume of data. So on the one hand, we have infrastructure where we would be talking, I think, about regional platforms. I don't think it is realistic to expect parties to be submitting to international public repositories where they have no say in the governance of those repositories. It just does not make sense to me. I think this is where biodiversity informatics initiatives such as GBIF present a particularly promising model for potential future developments. I'm going to kind of be really brief in relation to Jasmina's comments. I think, as Eduardo mentioned, I think the Friends of the Cali Fund is really important and very welcome initiative led by Chile and the UK. I'm reminded of George S. Patton's famous dictum that one should lead me, follow me, or get out of my way, which is a prescription I have tended to follow. So I am happy to follow others, but I'm also, and I think all of us should be happy to take a lead where necessary. I think it's not good enough to simply stand ready for many, many years now, while substantively in financial terms, not making any kind of contribution. So those are my views. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. As always, very much appreciated. Right, we are running out of time. We may be begging the organizers for just a couple more minutes, and if people have to leave, so be it, Sylvie. But we are recording, of course, so we will benefit from the overtime as well subsequently, if you care to find the web link when it's shared. So now let's move to my good friend Suel Al-Janabi, who, as you know, is director of GeoMedia and a long time involved in ABS and DSI, probably for a couple of decades, maybe almost as long as I have been. Suel, you're going to, I think, maybe if you have time, give us some highlights from the chat, which of course is being captured as well, and then immediately moving to perhaps a very brief overview of some of the informal processes, steps that are being taken place or being considered over the remaining interim period. So over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Tim, and thanks to all the participants and, of course, the contributors, and also those that put their thoughts in the chat. And I mean, it's a mind-blowing compilation of thoughts, of questions, and so on. I'm just going to highlight some of the topics. It is about this bilateral versus multilateral obligation stacking. Of course, the definition of DSI. Can one also have contractual certainty in that regard? Definition of users and contributions. The question of governance of DSI, transparency, then IP&LCs in relation, of course, to for example, the different standards, questions of benefiting, who benefits from the Cali Fund, would, for example, also farmers and communities benefit from contributions that come from animal plant breeding companies? Is there, for example, immediate action necessary and possible by governments right now? And a very, very huge discussion was about the necessity to create incentive measures for companies, and then of course, as we had contributions from other UN secretariats, this question on the alignment, going together of the different international fora, up to questions whether or not guidelines in that regard should be set up. I mean, so it's a real wealth of topics, of ideas, of questions, and of course we will try to make use of all this, which will be also reflected in the report of this very meeting, in the further activities that are related to the the process, to the informal DSI support process up to COP17. So just really as some spotlights that of topics that have been floating in the chat.
Thank you very much, Suel. Did you want to say a few words about the informal process forward?
Happy to do so.
Please, go ahead.
We can just put up this one slide. So, as it has been said by Ida in the beginning, there is a partnership between the Norwegian government and the European Commission to support informal activities in relation to DSI and the Cali Fund up to COP17. And the idea is in this intersessional period to provide spaces in global dialogues, in regional exchanges, also in the scope of multi-stakeholder events and public webinars like we're just having, to inform and to discuss and to exchange, to get really to workable solutions that address many of these questions that we've discussed today and that we also found in the chat. This is going to be also then underpinned with the development of knowledge products. And what I would maybe like to emphasize is, of course, because it has also been in the chat a couple of times, the recordings of the webinar and also a written report will be uploaded under the ABS Clearinghouse of the convention. There is this DSI resources page. There is the web link, so you could have a look at that. I think with the recording we will be done quite soon. The report may take a little bit longer into next week. And I would like also then to allude to the first in-person global dialogue, which is an informal one on DSI and the Cali Fund, funded by the European Commission in Belgium. And maybe here Mary from the Commission can just say some explanatory words on that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Suel. Mary Chiachi, over to you, please.
Thanks a lot. With pleasure. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to say a couple of words, a very short one, because we are over time already. Thanks a lot for these opportunities. I think Ida already explained very well that the idea around the informal process is precisely, first of all, I think it's based on the experience that we had in the past on the way to COP15 and to COP16. We had the opportunity already to cooperate together with Norway to support a series of activities that were actually implemented by Geomedia or by, at the time, the ABS Capacity Initiatives, by at the time Meridian as well. So a few informal opportunities to brainstorm together with key negotiators, with experts on DSI, with stakeholders, with all those who have a relevant role to play on DSI, and now in particular on the implementation of this decision on the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund. And we found it very useful because it offered the possibility precisely to go into depth without having our mandate on our heads of what we have to say, what we can say, what we cannot say, because we are formally negotiating. So it helped a lot. We found it useful, and we thought that probably it could have been useful to give it a second chance also for on the way to COP 17, precisely to see how to help making the Cali Fund a success and make this decision be fully implemented. Ida said it very well, that the idea is not absolutely to replace the formal process, but to support it. And here is the idea of the first in-person meeting. We hope that there will be a second one. For now, we have an indicative plan. Not everything is written in stone. We will, of course, also see, depending on the needs of what we have to, what we identify as priorities. And on this regard, I take the opportunities also to signal to us if you think that there's areas where we should dig into the dialogue, especially amongst the parties and stakeholders. We will happy to explore that. And of course, we will do this together with the CBD Secretariat and all other relevant actors. So the workshop will now take place in Leuven on beginning between the 10th and 12th of March. We have sent out around 40 invitations. It would have been lovely to have everybody around, but unfortunately it's not possible with it's not possible to find the appropriate venue. But we tried really to ensure regional balance and also balance representation of the key sectors for, addressed by the decision 16/2, as well, of course, relevant organizations, like, for instance, the Secretariat of the FAO Treaty, who can, still play a relevant role in the ongoing discussions. And of course, also IPLC's representatives. We really look forward for this event. Today, I think it was already a very good start on the way of the following step. And we hope that, we will manage to continue to support this, let's say, roadmap on the way to COP17, precisely with the view to, address all the issues that have emerged that we were not able to take properly into account during the negotiation in Cali. And let's see what we can do.
Thank you very much, Mary, for joining us from Brussels today, and thank you for your ongoing support and involvement. This concludes our webinar. I'd also like to thank our SCBD colleagues, other sponsors and collaborators in today's events. Also wish to thank all of our speakers. Very much appreciate your words. And finally, I wish to thank the interpreters who've been here working hard behind the scenes, and of course everyone who's online today. I look forward to seeing you again on the road to Armenia. Goodbye. Take care.